Now, my testimony actually starts way before I was even born. You see, 2 years after my middle sister was born, my mom got pregnant. And they were all excited and really blessed and that. And then my mom had a miscarriage. Now, you're saying, why are you telling me all this? It's so sad. Well, here's the goodness about this story. You see, my mom is a little person. She is dwarf. And a dwarf person can only have 3 C-sections. Otherwise, if they have more than 3 C-sections, it'll cause harm to the mom and to the baby. So if that baby that was conceived 8 years before I even existed had have been born, I would have never been here today. So we see that as a blessing, and that's a part of my testimony this morning. We know that we have a brother up in heaven looking down at us. We didn't know he was a boy, but we have a feeling that he was a boy. And we see it as a blessing in God's favor on my life, because if that baby boy had been born, life would not be as it is today. Destiny Raine Freeman might not even be here today. Now, flash forward to later on, my mom actually had a cyst on one of her ovaries. The cyst was actually the size of an orange. So they had to remove her one ovary. So for her to be pregnant again, the odds were not good. But yet, by the time she was 40, there's a big surprise that happened. She thought she was getting old, but she had no idea what she was getting in store for. Finally, they found out that they were pregnant with me. And they knew that this little girl, well, they didn't know at that time that I was a girl, but they knew that this baby was destined to reign. That this baby girl was sent to them for a purpose and for a reason. So let's bring it back to where I'm actually born and I'm in this world. I was born into a wonderful family. My parents, they're my rock. And I can literally stand here today and tell you that they are my best friends. Gonna try not to get emotional. But God gave me the best parents in the world. You know, they always spoke life into my life. They have been handed hardship after hardship, but never once have I ever seen them give up, because God was always their foundation that kept them going. I was born into a wonderful family with 2 amazing sisters who thought that they were my mom too. So I had 3 mothers. It was hard. It was rough. And my dad was the only guy in the household, and I don't know how he did it, but he did it. He survived having 3 daughters. But as I said, my parents always had a rock-solid foundation, which was their faith in the Lord. And growing up, I knew that that was important to them. So important that when I was 2 years old, I accepted Jesus into my heart. Now, if my mother was telling you this story, she would be sharing other achievements that day. But I will keep your ears from having to hear my potty training accomplishments. But when I was 2 years old, it was a pretty big day for me. So I accepted Jesus into my heart because I knew that I needed him even when I was but 2. See, growing up, my parents were always children's pastors. So we were always going to church, even more than the regular church goer. So Jesus and the church was always an important aspect of my life. So it was time for me to start kindergarten. And my parents, they're good, loving parents, and they thought it would be a great idea to enroll their kids into a private Baptist Christian school. But little did they know that it would be my own personal hell at school. You see, I was always a shy child, but when it came to me going to school, my teacher every day would publicly humiliate me because I wouldn't speak. There were times when a little girl would hand me my shoes, and if I didn't say thank you, I would have to go to every class in that hall, stand up front, and tell them what I didn't do, how I wasn't polite. There was a time when I wouldn't ask to go to the bathroom, so I would just go in my pants. And when I did that, the teacher would make me stand up in front of the class and tell them what I did. Every day would be a constant nitpicking on anything I didn't do that day. Every single day, and I'm not joking, every day I got a note sent home with me saying how bad I was, how terrible I was. And I actually found a note that I still have. We had all the notes, we kept them, and then my niece Melody, when she was a baby, ripped them all up. But I have one note, and I actually read it last night. And it said, Destiny Raine was handed her bag, and she did not say thank you right away. So she was sent out. She couldn't have snack until she chose to come in and say thank you. And it said, Destiny Raine finally agreed to it, came back in, and she could finally join us for snack. And at the end it said, I hope one day, Destiny, you will learn how to be polite. I was 5 years old. This was my first time in school. This was supposed to be a Christian school. This school, the classroom, the kindergarten classroom, had no toys in it. We didn't play. We had to learn how to write in cursive at 5 years old. Our teacher would come and correct you on the way you're holding the pencil. Time and time again, I got publicly humiliated by this teacher. So much so that we had a Christmas pageant. Well, I wasn't allowed to be a part of it because I wouldn't speak. So I had to sit in the audience while watching all my other friends up there. One day, during the winter, there was another little girl. She was taking too long to get her coat on. The teacher sent her outside for recess without a winter coat on. So one day, I don't know what I did, and I was never a bad kid. Like, my parents taught me manners. They taught me how to be polite. They taught me respect. So for them to get all these notes, we're like, what is Destiny doing? Like, this is not like her. But one day, I got sent out into the hallway for something that I didn't do. And I'm sitting there, and I wasn't allowed to come in. And this was after I had done my rounds in all the classrooms to tell them what I didn't do. I'm sitting there, and my sister, Steph, comes. And she sees me, and she says, like, what's going on? So right away, she's on the phone with my parents, and my parents show up like that. You see, I thought this is what school was supposed to be like. I never told my parents what was going on. They never knew that all this public humiliation was going on. They wondered why they were getting all these notes, and they just thought the teacher was crazy, which she was. But I never expressed to them what was going on. Because you're in kindergarten, you think this is what the teacher is supposed to do. You think this is what the school is supposed to be like. So when my parents showed up and found out all this stuff was happening, they rushed me to the principal's office. And they sat with the teacher. And the whole principal and his wife, actually the principal's wife actually took me around to the different classrooms as well. I don't know why they thought that was punishment, but it was punishment, but it was a weird punishment. But they did that, and all they could say was, well, we don't know what's wrong with her. We don't know why she doesn't talk. Like I was the problem here. They never once worked with me. They just pushed me to speak. You'll see this picture right here. This is my kindergarten picture. Do you see the sadness in those eyes? Do you see the hurt and the fear in those eyes? That is what my teacher did to me. Now the principal and his wife, they took the side of the teacher. They said, well, we can't help her. So my parents, they took me out of that school as fast as they could. Now I moved on to another school, and I finished my kindergarten, and it was amazing. We had toys, we had this, we had little chicks that we got to raise. My teacher, she would sit down on our level, being in the moment with us, not being strict, but actually treating us like children. But because of my experiences at the Christian school, I stopped talking. The only people that I would talk to at that time was my parents and my two sisters. I wouldn't even talk to my aunt and uncle. I wouldn't talk to my cousins. I wouldn't talk to my friends. And people often said to me, well, Destiny, just speak. Like, just say one word. But the thing is that you don't understand is there was so much fear that was built in my life around my voice. That what if I said something and what if it was wrong? What if I said something and it wasn't polite? What if I said something and they would embarrass me? You see, I was consumed by fear. So every school that I went to after that, it was always hard for my teachers to grade me. You know, oftentimes they thought I was dumb, that I was illiterate. I can't even say the word. See, I'm dumb. Illiterate, that I couldn't read. They always graded me C's and D's. That's all I would get. Elementary school, it's funny because no matter what school I attended, I always had friends. I always had a big group of friends. I don't know how, but I do know how because that was Jesus showing through me. That was what was enticing them to me, was Jesus in me. So when I was about 9 years old, you know, my whole life up to here, I've been told the calling of God is on your life. I knew I wanted to serve Jesus with all my life. So when I was 9 years old, I told my parents I want to be water baptized. And actually, my Uncle Harold baptized me. He almost drowned me, but he baptized me. So I decided, you know what, at 9 years old, I knew what it meant and I knew I wanted it. Then by 11 years, I was baptized by the Holy Spirit. I was at Elam, at camp meetings when we used to go there before I was a student, and they were speaking in tongues. And I knew that I wanted that too. I knew I wanted to be all in for Jesus. By 11 years old, at 2, I accepted Jesus in my heart. By 9, I was water baptized. And by 11, I was full of the Holy Spirit. You see, I always did things at a young age. I never let my age hinder my relationship with God. But bringing it forward, we're finally about at grade 5. And at this point, I'm still not talking to anybody, but I finally get comfortable with my teachers. See, there was always a trust that had to be built with my teachers, because that teacher from kindergarten broke any trust that I had with anybody else besides my family. So finally in grade 5, I finally built up the confidence to start whispering, not a full talk people, whispering to my teachers. And finally at this point, they're like, okay, we can do a reading test to see if she can really read. You know, they thought maybe I would be reading at a grade 2 level in grade 5. Well, I sure showed them that day, because they found out that at grade 5, I was reading at a grade 8 reading level. You see, my teachers always thought I was dumb, and they always graded me so low because they couldn't hear my voice. But that day, I proved them wrong. That yes, I was quiet, yes, I was shy, but I was retaining every bit of knowledge that I could.
Thank you, Jesus.
So finally, I was at a great school. I was there for 2 years, and everything was going great. And then my parents decided they're going to pack us all up and move us to Woodstock. And I'm like, really? Woodstock? Woodstock. Like, who would call a place Woodstock?
Yeah.
Like, we came from Guelph. Guelph was good. Guelph had a mall. Like, Guelph was awesome, and then you're moving us to Woodstock. That hick town. I don't want to live there. Are you kidding me? Like, I'll just live in Guelph and you can come visit me. At 12 years old, you know. But who knew that by them accepting the job here at the family church and moving our family to Woodstock would be one of the greatest things that could ever happen to my life. You see, because I had built up that little bit of confidence and trust with my previous teacher in grade 6 and grade 5, I was more willing to build that trust with my next teachers. And it was actually in grade 8, and all my teachers and my parents and everybody was telling me, like, next year's high school. High school is going to be so much harder. Like, throughout elementary school, I always had a resource teacher that would come in. I had a speech teacher that would come in and work with me, and I would get sour gummy dinosaurs. That was the best part. But I always had someone coming in and working with me, and then high school would be a completely different story. It wouldn't be just one teacher I would be working with, but at least 4 different teachers a day I would be working with. And everyone was saying, Destiny, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really, really hard. And you know what? One day, the day after Valentine's Day, I felt like today is the day. Nobody pushed me that day. No one convinced me to speak that day. But finally, with the confidence of God, I spoke out for the first time in 9 years. I was sitting in my math class, and I just had this feeling in me. I was like, today is the day. I had this peace. I had this freedom in me. And I'm like, yeah, today's the day. If it's not today, it'll never happen. It's got to be today. So I wrote down on my little paper, with my little pen, to my best friend next to me, and I said, I'm going to talk today. My best friend looked at me like, what? So my other friend was sitting at the other table, and I'm like, Tasha. And she's like looking all around, because she doesn't recognize the voice, right? So she's looking all around, and she realizes it was me. And she's like, guys, Destiny just talked to me. And all of a sudden, all at once, all the faces turned and looked at me. And I'm like, hi. They're like, do it again. I'm like, hi. But you see, that moment, I had the most freedom I have ever had in 9 years. And it was so joyous. It was such a happy occasion because it didn't just impact my friends in that class. It didn't just impact my teacher. It didn't just impact my classmates, but it influenced the whole school. Because after that, I went to my next class, and they're like, oh, we're going to surprise the teacher. And so I'm there, and I raise my hand, and the teacher comes over, thinking I'm going to point out whatever I'm going to do. And I speak to her, and I'm like, what day is it? And she's like, oh, and she doesn't realize that I'm talking to her. And it takes her a minute, and she's like, oh, you're speaking, Destiny. What is going on? And it was just so amazing to see the joy and the impact that me talking had on all these people. And everybody was following me around at recess. I had to hide in the bathroom to get away from people because everybody just was like so dumbfounded in awe of this miracle that had just happened and that they just witnessed. And it was amazing because it didn't just stop there with my teachers and all this. But then at the end of the day, they marched me up to the office. They had me go on the intercom and tell the whole school to have a great day. And in that moment, the whole school erupted in celebration because they knew me. They knew me as that shy, timid girl who always had a smile on her face. But finally, they heard the voice behind those shy eyes. And that was my day of freedom. That was my day of celebration. And that was not just my day, but everybody else around me that celebrated and rejoiced in the miracle that had just taken place in my life. Because, like I said before, everyone said, well, just speak, Destiny. But it wasn't that simple. There were times before that I had tried to do it. I had opened my mouth and nothing would come out. Because that fear was still evident in my life. So next slide, Stephanie. You see the difference from kindergarten to grade 8.
All right.
You see, during those 9 years of my life, yes, I had fear in my life. Yes, there was a bondage in my life. But I always had the joy of the Lord inside of me. I always knew that there was a reason that I went through all of this, and that one day my testimony would bring honor and glory to God and His faithfulness. You see, a few years ago, I've actually brought forgiveness into my heart from my kindergarten teacher. Because I think that's very important to acknowledge that I forgive her. I have no idea where she is or what she's doing, or even if she's still alive, I don't know. But I forgive her. And I see the goodness of God through all of this. Because all of those 9 years that I wasn't talking, I was listening. All those 9 years that I wasn't speaking, I was learning. All those 9 years that I wasn't speaking out loud, I was retaining knowledge and understanding and building that my identity is not just built upon my voice, but my identity is built upon the Lord. So finally, that was my day, my victorious day, my day of breakthrough. Because I knew high school was coming and it was going to be so much harder. So I went to high school and I excelled in high school. I did really well in my classes. See, all through elementary school, I only got C's and D's. Well, my first semester in high school, I got A's and B's. Because finally, they could see that I wasn't dumb, that I wasn't illiterate, that I actually knew what was going on, because I could never ask questions. I could never ask for help when I needed it. I always had to figure out a way to help myself and work through the problem. But finally in high school, I was accelerating. I was doing great. My friends were amazing, and I was living the dream, and I was having a great time. And then it was when I was about 16 that I reaffirmed that there was a call of God on my life. It was actually here at the family church where Paul Johnston, some of you may remember him, he has passed on to be with the Lord, but Paul Johnston always holds a special place in my heart. Because at that time, we had taken a break from the family church and we had just returned. And I was talking back then, right? So then Paul Johnston came up to me and asked me, would you like to help out with Sunday school? And I said, sure. Like, I've done that my whole life. I was cultivated to be a part of children's ministry, to help out with my parents. I learned how to do all this stuff and everything. And I said, yeah, absolutely. So by Paul Johnston coming and following the Lord's prompting to ask me to be a part of the children's ministry, I realized that I wanted to be a children's pastor. It was actually funny when I told my parents that I wanted to be a children's pastor. They're like, are you sure? Like everyone's going to think you just want to be a children's pastor because we're forcing it down your throat. And I said, well, no, like I love it. I love children. I always wanted to do something with kids and teaching and something for the Lord. You know, that was my biggest aspiration, was to do something for God. So I thought, like, this is perfect, blending the two, kids and God, it works together. And I said, like, I really feel like I'm called to do it, and I want to go to Elam. At that point, my mom was like, really? Like, that's my school. You want to go to Elam? And I'm like, yeah, I want to go to Elam. Like, I feel called to go there. And so I go to Elam, and I loved it. Elam is such a big part of my life. If you've never been there, you need to go there because you will literally feel the presence of the Lord as you walk on the campus. There is no other place like it. But I went to Elam with this calling that I think I had on my life to be a children's pastor, because that's what I wanted to do. That was my whole heart. And I went to Elam, and I enjoyed it. And then there was my second year. My whole life fell apart. And I think I shared this, I don't know, a few months ago, about where I broke. I was at my lowest point in my life. I was where depression just embodied me. And I told people, I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I'm always this happy-go-lucky person, and I enjoy life, but in this moment, I didn't feel anything. I always said that if you cut me open at that point in life, you wouldn't see blood and guts and all the wood. All you would see was darkness in my life, inside of me, because that's all I felt. I just felt nothing. And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And then all of a sudden, it's during our week of prayer, and I have this really bad chest pain. And it was like unbearable. Like every time I moved, every time I breathed, it was just pain. And I couldn't figure out what it was, so I went to the doctor on the campus. He didn't know what was wrong with me. Americans, right? He thought that my lung had collapsed. Okay, Mr. Doctor. My lung is not collapsed. But anyways, I'll do what you say. So I went for an x-ray. Everything was fine. I knew it'd be fine. But I'm sitting there during the week of prayer when all of a sudden I get this image that the reason I've been in so much pain, the reason that I've been so broken is because God broke me. He broke my heart, and He showed me this vision of this dark black heart, and it was all broken. And then all of a sudden, there was a needle and thread weaving through my heart. And as that needle and thread was weaving through my heart, that heart went pink. It went red. And life was finally back inside my heart. You see, God had to break me in order for me to know that it was Him that all that I needed. There were things in my life that had to be broken off of me. My pride had to be broken off of me. At that time, I was a very prideful person. I tried to be perfect. I tried to be the best daughter. I tried to be the best friend. I tried to make sure that everything looked perfect. But that was my pride that had total control over my life. And that needed to be broken off. So God had to make me feel broken so that I would feel complete in Him. through that time, I saw the faithfulness of God. I saw that even when I'm at my lowest, when I feel inadequate, when I feel broken, when I feel like my life is falling apart, God is still there with me in total control.
Yes, amen.
So after that, my relationship with God was reaffirmed. It was rock solid. It was tighter than it's ever been. And my relationship with God has always been tight. Like since age of 2, we've always been buddies. But this is where he knew me. He knew me in my darkest and most broken moment, and he still chose to love me. So after Elam, my senior year, I loved that place, and I did not want to leave. I wanted to stay on there. I had many job opportunities to stay there. But because I was Canadian, it never worked out. They actually talked to a lawyer because they wanted me to stay. I wanted to stay. But it never worked out because it didn't work because I didn't have the right degrees to stay. So after Elam, I didn't go into full-time ministry. And that's really hard when you graduate Bible college, you're on fire for the Lord, you're ready to be in ministry, you're ready to do this, and then God calls you to clean toilets. Okay, God. But you see, even when I was cleaning toilets, I saw the faithfulness of God in my life. Because you see, my theology was that ministry happens within the four walls of the church. But something I learned at Elam is that ministry is through every interaction that you have every day. So ministry is when you're working with a coworker, cleaning toilets, and they're here sitting in church today. That is ministry. Ministry is showing the level of excellence you have while cleaning toilets, because that's the same level of excellence you have in your life. Ministry is not just within the four walls, and who knew that I was doing ministry even when I didn't even know I was doing ministry? So I loved my job, and then all of a sudden, in 2019, I felt like my grace was leaving for where I was at. In my heart, I felt that my grace for cleaning was running out. And the way my mentor explains it is that when you're in a season of life, this is your season of life, God gives you the grace for that season. But when God is transitioning you to another season, that grace slowly moves on, and you've got to move up with it. So for 2 years, I felt like I was in a transition, and I didn't know what that was. I felt an restlessness in my life. Like I wanted more, but God really wasn't opening the doors for more. So I applied to numerous ministry opportunities. And I got the job. And it would have been a great job. It would have been exactly what I was looking for. But I didn't have peace about it. And I always told them, because one place was in Grimsby, and I would have had to move there, I always said that I can't leave my church. I can't leave my church. And I never had peace about these job opportunities. So I was like, God, like, what are you doing? Where are you leading me? Like, my resume would have been perfect. I would have been good at that job. But the peace wasn't there. And that was a big, important part. I was like, God, what are you doing? But at that time, I couldn't understand what was holding me to the family church. I couldn't understand why I was stuck here, it seemed. Because when you go to Bible college, you don't want to come back to your home church and get stuck. Because that happens to a lot of Bible college students. You go home, you're ready to do ministry, and all of a sudden you're just another face in the crowd. And you're stuck. You don't know where to go. You don't know what to do. And I was so adamant about not being stuck, and yet I was stuck. But I couldn't understand why I was being held to the family church. And then Pastor Ken Stoddard left. And I was telling people about how our pastor had resigned and he was leaving. And I talked to about 8 different people from all walks of life, and most of them weren't even from this church. And every single one of them said to me, well, DR, why don't you do it? And I'm like, huh? Funny, yeah, right? But if I'm being honest, that's kind of always been an idea in the back of my mind. But it wasn't until I talked to all of those people that I knew that that was the reason why I was here for so many years.
Yes.
Because I had been feeling this calling to the family church.
Yes.
So after I had confirmation by person, I said, okay, God, if this is your will, I am stepping out in faith, and I will go talk to the directors and the elders of the church. So I did. I went to them, I applied for the position, and the moment that I did, and after I had the interview, and this was a really long process. This was back in February, guys. This was back in February that this started. But the moment that I did and I had the interview, I finally felt that peace that I was looking for. You know, even this whole process of applying for this position, of voting me in, it's been a long, drawn out ordeal, and it's because of COVID, but I also believe because it's God, because God's in total control. But even through this long, drawn process, that peace has never left me. Maybe sometimes my thinking wavered, and do I really want to do this? Am I really called to do this? Am I really adequate enough for this position? But then that peace would kick in, and that would knock out all of those lies of the enemy that were in my mind. Throughout this whole time, God's peace and His presence has been my rock solid foundation, and what has kept me going through these, I don't know, is it about 6 months we've been doing this? But back in 2014, while I was a student at Elam, I was prophesied over. And at this time, one of the students said that God was going to change my name like He did with Peter. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, my name's pretty great. I don't want Him to change my name. But it was in those 2 years that I was feeling there's a transition in my life. It was where God was changing my name from children's pastor to pastor. And that is where God was preparing my heart to be a pastor's heart. God was cultivating my calling in my life. Because, you see, I felt uneasy, I felt restless. But who knew that God was changing my identity without me even knowing it? It was through every interaction that Pastor Ken Stoddard and Pastor Ken Charlton had given me over the years that I've been slowly getting a taste of what being a pastor is. It was through every opportunity they gave me to preach or lead prayer meetings that I was building up this confidence of who God was calling me to be. You know, oftentimes I say this quote, but God does not call the equipped, He equips the called. And God has been doing that in my life. And that brings us to today, where I feel called to be the next pastor of the family church.